My name is Rick Haskell, and I have a teaching appointment in the Department of Economics at the University of Utah, where I did my doctoral work in economics some years ago. But I'm also a faculty member at Westminster College. But more important than either of those things, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I adore my family. I cherish the moments we get to spend together. But I also really appreciate the perspective that I'm able to see things from, largely because of some of the exposure I had in business. For 30 plus years, I owned my own business in the investment industry and in owning businesses. And I enjoy that perspective, but it was sharpened by the opportunities I've had in higher education, sharpened by the opportunity to see clearly. And that's part of what a doctoral education will give you. So that's who I am. So I became interested in finance and economics really even before I did my undergraduate work. I had an opportunity to spend a couple of years in upstate New York with some other people working together on some things that were very important to us. And my opportunity ended up landing me in a position where I had to understand something about the finances of the operation. And then I had to understand something about investing some of the surplus that operation spun off. And that gave me a perspective that I never imagined I would have. It gave me an opportunity to view some things that I would never have expected. And that really led me to a college education at Brigham Young University focused on investment and finance. That led me then to a career in finance. And during all of that, I began to realize that finance was simply microeconomics at the level of the firm. And even though I'd only taken one economics course at BYU, and it was a very rudimentary one, it was the introduction to economics as a social science. There is no level of rigor in that class, but it got some things turned into the back of my little head. Yes, planted some seeds, if you will. And over the decades of business ownership, I began to look at things more and more and more from an economist's perspective. And I read and I studied and I listened to everything that I possibly could until finally, in my 50s, I took an opportunity, having sold some businesses, took an opportunity to enter into a graduate program and then a doctoral program in economics. And doing that was just a catalyst to open things up even further. And so what was interesting to me became very instrumental to me to become a passion for me. And I'm just nothing but grateful for having had the opportunity and experience. So I had an opportunity to go to work for a company by the name of Dean Witter, which is today Morgan Stanley. Dean Witter was one of the largest investment firms in the country at the time. Morgan Stanley still is. It was an extraordinary opportunity. I had a chance to start as a stockbroker in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then took a management assignment, and then went to New York with the company in management, and then down into Texas to take a regional assignment. And it was tremendous exposure, and one that I will tell you that at the end of that, I had mixed feelings about, because I worked myself all the way into a position where I got fired. I usually tell people we had a parting of the ways, but the fact of the matter is I was a little too big for my britches. And I got myself summarily dismissed and had to put my tail between my legs. But as it turns out, one of the best experiences I've ever had. It made me really rethink things and made me have a different perspective on how we should act, how we should comport ourselves, and what we should do to stretch and how far we should or should not stretch. And my family and I then took the opportunity to return here to Utah, where my wife and I had met. I had an opportunity to do some work with a company that I had some ownership in for a period of years. That was an investment for me, and we expanded that company to the point that we sold my part of it and then used that money to invest in another company that we expanded again until we sold it, and that then let me have the resources to create another investment firm of my own rather than someone else's. And that then led me to investment management, private equity, a little bit of VC work, and interacting with private equity and VC and big lenders. They've given me a tremendous exposure, and it was at the end of 30 years of that, having then sold that business, that allowed me to step back for a moment, earn my master's first in economics, and then earn my doctorate in economics, all the while having had 30 plus years of experience that I could think about the application for these things. See, it's very different being in school and learning through textbooks and such. Even when you're talking to someone as a faculty member that has some sense of business, Very different than when you're talking with someone that's doing business, that hasn't just sometimes been involved, but it's been everything for their profession. And even today, I'm still actively engaged in business outside of the college. I work a little bit with Goldman Sachs, and I do some work with private clients. So I think my students very quickly realize that I'm not the sharpest tack in the drawer. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm a dullard, but I have some attributes that serve myself, my family, and hopefully my students well. I have a fair amount of discipline. In fact, sometimes I will joke and say that I'll work a mere mortal under the table. I think that a 60-hour work week is when we're just warming up to get going. I also met a guy years and years ago by the name of Monty Holm. And Monty was a great business leader. And Monty had this little saying that I heard him say it once, and I asked him to repeat it afterwards, and I wrote it down, and I said it over and over. I love to do hard things. I'm the first to do hard things. I do hard things first. Now, I have to admit to you that when I first heard that, and when I first said that to myself, it was not true of me. It's having said it to myself thousands of times in the decades that it's become true of me. I like to hike. And when I've been on a particularly difficult hike, maybe I'm 10 or 12 miles out, or I've gone up 3,000 feet in elevation over 6 or 8 miles, I'm getting a little bit tired. You might have noticed I'm a little bit older. And I will find myself repeating, almost like a mantra, I love to do hard things. I'm the first to do hard things. I do hard things first. I'm saying it with every step because it keeps me going, because it's a hard thing. I think that too many of us are afraid to do hard things. I was afraid to do hard things. And when I realized the value and virtue in doing something difficult, doing something that took you outside of your comfort zone, doing something that was unexpected, it was a transcendent moment. So I want them to know those things about me. But just as I said a few minutes ago, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I adore my family. I am so grateful for the patience, the lovingness, the kindness of my wife, the generosity that she holds, that I could never express it. I'm so appreciative of having had the opportunity to be a father and a mentor, and now a friend and father to 4 extraordinary little human beings who aren't little at all anymore. They're in their 30s. My baby is 30 and my oldest is 40. I think students should also know I am dead serious about business. Business done right isn't just about making money, but it does give us the resources that come from making money that let us do things with that money, things that can be good for others around us. See, I'm a capitalist. I'm a capitalist pig. I'm proud of it. A student gave me a t-shirt one time that hangs proudly in my office. It's got a picture of a farm swine on it with the word capitalist written across that pig. And I love that. I love that a student gave it to me, but I also love just the icon of it. I'm a committed capitalist. And I'm dead serious about business, and I'm dead serious about making money because I know that I have a responsibility. As a business owner, I'm responsible to those that own the capital. And more often than not, that's been me. But it's also then rippled down to my family and others that I care about greatly. But if it wasn't myself and my family, it would be others to whom we're responsible. And we're responsible to create profits and surpluses for them. But I think we're responsible to do something else. We're responsible to use those surpluses wisely. We're responsible to use those surpluses generously, not generally. Maybe it's not our obligation. Maybe it's only our privilege to be able to do that. But I think students need to know that about me as well. So I am the capitalist pig, but I'm absolutely committed to the sharing and philanthropy that comes from having been one for a lifetime. I want my students at the University of Utah to understand that economics is the science of decision making. And in the classes I teach at the University of Utah, we're primarily dealing with labor. And labor is a really interesting input to production. We as workers are used to help produce things that are then sold to businesses, people, households, etc. So we're inputs to production. Only we're unique as inputs to production because we, unlike any other input that we can think of, have the ability to change. We are sentient. We can make up our own minds. We can change. We can shift. We can become better. We can be less productive. We can become more productive. We can become more virtuous, less virtuous. We can change. And that makes us unique amongst any input to production. So I love labor economics, and I love that economic spectrum, because we get to then study that ability to see how decisions are made and model how decisions are made with an input that has the ability to change its own mind. That's tremendously valuable, to be able to think that way. I like people in my classes to recognize that what I'm trying to teach them isn't simply about economics and models and numbers and math, although there's a lot of that. I want them to be able to have thought through scenarios well enough that when they're sitting at someone's dinner table, at a restaurant, in a party, at a business meeting, they know the difference between what they know and what they don't know. And more importantly, at that moment, they know the difference between what that other person is saying and what can be known about that thing. They can cut through the garbage because they have a framework. They have a model. They understand how decisions are made. That's what I want them to get. So it's interesting. I'm one of the lucky ones. I went to school. Well, I don't know what I wanted to do at the very first. I think I wanted to do something in business and something in finance. I'd always been interested in that kind of thing. It caused me to have some experiences before college that were a little unusual, where I got to manage some pretty large budgets and some pretty large operations, even as a very young person. But I knew I wanted to do something in business, but very quickly I realized I wanted to be in the investment industry, and then I was able to be. I wanted to be a stockbroker without knowing what a stockbroker did. It just sounded cool, and I'd seen some stockbrokers and made some money with some, and I realized they were making more money off of me probably than I was making with them, and that was okay. But I thought I wanted to be a stockbroker. I got my job. I mean, the job I'd wanted for years I got with Dean Witter. And then my manager, a great man by the name of Bill Phillips, sat me at a desk in a little office in Hayward, California, and said, okay, there's the phone and there's the phone book. You have your licenses now. Find some clients. And all of a sudden I realized I was a stockbroker, but that meant until I had clients, I was a cold caller. So I learned to make 200 cold calls a day. This is before auto dialers, before you had call waiting, before numbers came up on a screen to show you who was calling, so people actually answered their phones. So we had actually a fighting chance at this. And during the day, I would call businesses, and in the evenings, I would call neighborhoods where I thought people maybe were a little bit more well-off, had higher incomes and higher wealth. And I made 200 dials a day. And it took me a little bit to develop a few clients, and then I developed a few more, and then after a year or so, I didn't have to keep doing that. I was one of the lucky ones. I had the discipline, I had the good fortune, and I was blessed. And I think it just comes down to that. I was fortunate enough to have a wife that was willing to support this. I was fortunate enough to have an intellect that could kind of process some of it. But more importantly than that, I was fortunate enough to have the very generous recommendations and generous time spent on me of some incredible professionals. Well, you know, it's interesting. I began to teach at the University of Utah because I was told to. As a doctoral student in economics, one of the expectations was that I would end up teaching a class. And so my chair of the department at the time, a guy by the name of Tom Maloney, who became a dear friend over the years, assigned me to a labor economics course. He knew I had some inkling, some interest in labor. And so I was assigned to this course, and I had to start teaching that course at 8:30 a.m. 2 mornings a week. And I know almost nothing about labor economics at the time. So I would get up at about 5 a.m. I would then go get myself to campus as soon as I could. I'd made sure that I had read the chapters. I'd done all the homework problems. I'd put together all my notes. I didn't use PowerPoints and such. I did everything on the board because labor economics is a lot about models and metrics and numbers and equations. And so I was preparing myself a class or two ahead of what I was then teaching the students. It was a tremendous experience for me. I think that the students actually learned something. I actually keep in touch with some of those first students I had. But in that process, I realized I loved the teaching apparatus. I loved the process. I loved the sharing. I loved the exploration. I didn't expect to teach. I went to the university to earn a doctorate in economics so that I could then go back into private practice or into consulting or into policy work of some kind, never expecting that I would teach. And I was hooked from the very first class. And I've taught there ever since. I've been able to teach labor economics, current economic problems, the economics of discrimination, health economics, some really interesting issues that deal with some of the more poignant issues of our times, and do so from both a quantitative and a social perspective, which is what a holistic education in economics allows you to do, a heterodox education in economics allows you to do. And I'm nothing but grateful for it. All right. That's a big question. So I now have students that work on multiple continents, that work with small businesses and large businesses, who have taken the little bit that I taught them as a foundation and have learned more and are doing something with it. Students that go on to any profession, that have had professors that approach them with real genuine interest, with a passion for what the subject matter is, with a commitment to virtuously share, explore, deal with the more difficult issues and the easy ones of any given discipline. Those students take what little they were taught, amplify it by experiences, and if they then can echo that virtue, that passion, that interest, they literally change the world in ripples. I know this sounds very trite, ripples on the pond, kind of trite, right? We might as well sing Kumbaya together. But the fact of the matter is, we do this one good intent at a time. None of us will ever look back and wish we had been less virtuous, or that we'd shared less of ourselves, or that we had loved less, or that we'd been less integrous or less honest. We all wish we had simply been more. I've come to realize, because some very wise people that are yet more experienced, aka old, than I am, that we actually do more than we think we did. Because what we did here, wherever here happens to be, in the life of that one student at that one moment, is replicated as that student does it with more, and as those people do it with more, we end up having done more. We just don't know that we did. So I'm grateful for having had that opportunity, and I know that students can and will change, just as I hopefully have been able to make some minimal changes, some modest changes in my world and the world of those that I'm closest to. So when I created the labor economics course that I now periodically have a chance to teach, I did so at first because I was simply told, teach a labor economics course. But then I was given the latitude to create an online version of it and then to morph it into a way that I could weave societal issues and quantitative issues in the same class. That's a trick, as it turns out. And students have to be willing to go on that journey with you, and have to be willing to engage and have those dialogues. And so my motivation was to take what I had learned in economics, with the passion that I have for labor as an input to production, and with my interest in capitalism and in being socially responsible and being philanthropic, and combine them into a course that people could take, understand, and utilize. You see, that course is the only economics course that anyone will ever take where we know that we are part of the market, the specific market, not the global, not the national market, but the specific market that the course is talking about. We are all in the labor market. We either all have jobs or have had jobs or are preparing for a job or are going to have a job, every one of us with little exception. And that job may be in the private sector, in the public sector, it might be for a nonprofit, it may be for a financial behemoth. It doesn't make any difference. We're all part of that market. And that class does one thing through all of the weeks of the course, all of the modules that we've created. It does one thing. It answers a question. And that question is, why do different workers receive different wages? That's all it does. Well, it turns out, or as it turns out, that's not an easy question to answer. That question is extraordinarily complex because, again, labor is sentient. Labor can morph. And the marketplace around labor is sometimes profit-seeking, sometimes profit-maximizing, sometimes utility-seeking. And those differences create some really interesting dynamics. So my motivation was to put this out there in such a way that it could be approachable and that where we could weave all the quantitative elements that form the foundations of all the social realities that are a byproduct of labor. So throughout my career, I was very fortunate. I was able to look at the world of investments and society through an economic lens, not because I'd taken a lot of economics, but because I had been really interested in the little economics I took. And even though in my major I didn't have to have much more, in my career I fed myself. I read about, I went to lectures about, I listened to things. We didn't have TED Talks back 30 or 40 years ago like we do today, but we still had enough access to things that I was able to really learn a lot about economics from a layperson standpoint while I was in my career. And I knew in doing that I wanted to understand more. I knew enough to carry on a conversation, but not with the most experienced, not with the most learned, and I didn't like that. And sometimes I found myself on panels or in discussions or in rooms with people that knew a lot more about these things than I did, and I wanted to be one of them, and the only way I could get there was through an advanced education in economics. There wasn't going to be enough experience to get me there. I had to apply some foundational theoretical understanding. So when I had a chance to have a successful sale of a business and take a few years away from major income generation, I took the opportunity to first prepare for that with a master's in economics, then to go into a doctoral program. And I chose to do so at the University of Utah, not because it was the school that I longed to go to. I mean, I'd gone to BYU, of course. The University of Utah was the other side of the mountain. You know, it was the arch rival, if you will. But it was also the school that was the closest to me, and they happened to have had a very highly respected program, but it was a heterodox economics program, and I didn't know what that meant. I very quickly realized that some people thought it meant that it was a very liberal program. And there literally were professors that had gone through and were teaching in that program that had been card-carrying communists, and they were proud of it. And they offered great input. And there were people that were very conservative as well, and they offered great input. Heterodox simply means holistic. It simply means broad-based, willing to consider numerous viewpoints, not just any given one. And when I came to realize that that's what it meant, and when I came to saw how these different extraordinary minds executed against that, I was fascinated. I went from having chosen the University of Utah because it was 25 or 30 miles from my home, and it meant that I didn't need to move, and my wife and children didn't deserve to be caused to move so that I could go through a little bit more education at the time. But I went from selecting it because it was the only decent selection I really had, to then being extraordinarily grateful that it was the one in my proximity. It gave me a perspective. It gave me a vantage point, if you will, to look at economics not from just one narrow slice, because you can look at economics from a very narrow slice, and it's dangerous when you do that. But to be able to recognize the virtue of what's in that slice and what's around the sides of it, and that the pie is bigger and bigger and bigger than most of us will ever recognize. I certainly don't have the mind to really capture the entirety of the global economy. But I can understand the slice and a little bit more. And because of the training that I received there in that kind of a program, it let me do that and maybe a little bit more still. And so why did I choose it? It was right there. In retrospect, would I have chosen anything else? Absolutely not.